Hey everyone, today I'll be building up a 60% keyboard I designed using acrylic, palm, and walnut. Not a whole lot else going on really. Let's get into it. Before we begin, I just wanted to be transparent and let you all know that this video is sponsored by PCBWay. In short, the circuit boards featured here were provided free of charge in exchange for this content. But rest assured, the representatives at no point dictated the script or inquired about my feedback ahead of time. About as close to no strings attached as you get in the YouTube world, I guess. Thanks, PCBWay. Alright, for the sake of breaking out of my niche and not slogging through many hours of footage, I'll avoid talking about the nuances of PCB design. If you're a regular here, I'll assume you're fairly well versed in my process, and if not, I have a mostly finished playlist on my channel. Is today the day you'll stop reaching for productivity vicariously through endless hours on YouTube? If the answer is a very proud and resilient no, we're very much kindred spirits. Anyways, we'll start by reviewing the boards I received for this project. As I alluded to earlier, I opted to have the PCBs shown on screen here, assembled since I've been through refill by hand, and honestly, an evening is more valuable to me these days than $20 or $30 in the bank. PCBWay made this process tremendously straightforward with their instant quoting for printing the main boards, as well as their individual review of the production files for viability and consistency. The representative I was working with, Choi, was diligent and capable of answering all of the questions I had regarding the plant's capabilities. When they offered to provide the boards in exchange for mentioning them in a video halfway through my order process, with genuinely no corporate copy or requirements, I was more than excited to take them up on the offer. Taking a look at the boards, then, I really do feel that they did a great job, given how complicated some of the custom footprints I added were. The only things of note were, 1, an accidentally exposed pad on top that an engineer must have overridden in light of some inconsistencies in the artwork, and 2, the exclusion of silkscreen within a very thin area of solder mask spelling out my name. I figured these must have been flagged within the review process, but it just would have been nice to have been made aware ahead of time if there was indeed a manufacturing issue. For the record, I've had identical footprints implemented just fine, so who knows? Not a big deal either way. As far as assembly and function are concerned, though, everything worked beautifully. I was immediately able to flash the boards using QMK and delve straight into switch preparation. All in all, if you're looking for manufacturing and turnkey service, PCBWay is, in my opinion, the best on the market presently. Unlike a certain other prototyping service, also based in Shenzhen, they will go out of their way to source parts for you and won't make exceptions for components like through-hole connectors or those that aren't in a very limited collection. I also just really like their green solder mask. Super vibrant. Is that weird? Anyways, thanks again, PCBWay. The support means a lot. All right, that over, let's get down to an activity infinitely less enjoyable than coordinating production: switch lubing. I really don't understand how people end up watching this stuff on Twitch unless they either are simply looking for filler material while lubing switches themselves, or hate their jobs so much that they have rewired their brain to find mundane activities like manual labor and sitting in a hot tub, while attractive, somehow entertaining. What a miserable and uninspiring world we inhabit. Anyway, I opted for a batch of mod tactile switches from Originative Co. that I won at a Seattle meetup a few years ago. The ones I'm using are the H variant, which I assume just stands for heavy and indicates the relative strength of the spring with respect to others in the lineup, namely L or light and M or medium. Maybe? Sounds right. Let's go with it. The reasoning was that I had wanted to use a brass plate I had left over from the Unikorn and didn't want to use linears given the increased likelihood of bottoming out. I still bottom out, but at least this way I follow some of the unwritten rules of the mechanical keyboard hobby. As a plus, I had taken the switches apart at one point, so time saved. Since I have feeble fingers, I opted to replace the original 78 gram springs with 62 gram ones, essentially making these equivalent to Mod Ls. Throwing them all in a container with some Krytox 205 grade 0, I know, it's a meme, I close and shake the collection to distribute the grease evenly. I'm sure there are more technical ways to accomplish this, but honestly, most of my participation in the hobby has been with stock switches, and I don't really care if there is an ever so slight ping when I place the switch a few millimeters away from my ear in testing. In short, anything is better than nothing, and I much prefer a sparse application of lube. Ah yes, what a perfect justification for half-assing the switches. Here, I'm trying to use a loop station I incorporated into the keyboard design, but it ended up being less than ideal since there is quite a bit of slack, and the switches are easily moved away from their positions. Probably just stick with the typical cutouts if you want to do something similar. Anyway, not a ton of nuance here. Lube the rails and pull holes within the housings sparingly, and then repeat along all sides of the switch stems that make contact. Since these are tactiles, however, I opted not to touch the bump that interfaces with the contact leaves, but this is just a personal preference. If I wanted a linear, I'd have just opted for a linear. Oh good, it's now evening. What a totally worthwhile use of a Saturday. Switch is done. Let's grab the PCB and apply the stabilizers. Here, I'm using finish line Teflon grease between the plastic parts and then Permatex dielectric grease to pack the empty space that houses the wire. The former application is to reduce friction and improve feel, while the latter is typically done to reduce rattling as the switch is depressed. If you have an OEM keyboard lying around or have heard any mainstream content creator type, you absolutely know what this sounds like. These needed more work after typing for a bit, but I eventually got them to an acceptable position. If you're still getting a high-pitched rattling noise, feel free to adopt a devil-may-care approach and flood the housing with dielectric grease. After all, the only person who will know of your sin is you and whichever deity you hold in high regard. Looks like Christ all died for nothing. On to soldering, an activity that is largely overhyped in the mechanical keyboard scene. Like computer building, this process is mostly akin to adult Legos. Pop the switch in the hole, heat the pad with an iron, and push a spool of wire into the pad. Honestly, the hardest part lies more so with fitment and making sure the switches are properly seated, especially if your cutouts end up being even slightly out of spec. Unfortunately, this was the predicament I found myself in, as the brass plate from the Unikorn kit was really tight. Normally, you can just push the switches through the plate and have them clip in, but the combined resistance of the plate and tight tolerances of the PCB mount poles made completely seating the housings a Herculean effort by my standards. For the record, this is one of the many reasons I tend to prefer plastic plates, much less hassle since there is usually a little more give in the material. My poor thumbs. From there, the actual solder application ended up being a breeze. Again, just heat the pin pad area with an iron and feed your spool of wire until it forms a cohesive pool. Not a whole lot of nuance, and I'm sure there are more qualified instructional videos on YouTube. For through-hole components like switches, you're looking for a sort of parabolic cone where the solder flares out as it transitions from the switch pin to join with the pad. Of course, anything will work well, but electronics enthusiasts tend to see blobs as less than ideal. Anyways, once I had everything soldered, I quickly checked that the switches worked by plugging the assembly into my computer. I'd already flashed the board with a custom firmware using QMK and tested the connections separately, so I'll spare you the software side of things for now. As an aside, if you are interested in the programming aspects of this design, let me know in the comments or go check out the QMK Docs along with MechMerlin's videos here on YouTube. Per usual, I'll link some useful recommendations in the description. Switch is done, onto the acrylic layers. After drafting the files in AutoCAD, I sent off the designs to Ponoko and once received, broke them down. Peeling away the protective adhesive sheets kind of sucks, but it's still better than switch lubing. Still, we're 0 for 4 as far as fun is concerned in this build blog. Sometimes making keyboards is just work. Fortunately, I had some leftover walnut I had used for testing out some varnish oil from Tried and True last year, so more time saved. Can you gauge the theme of this video yet? If you guys are interested in wood finishing, I'll definitely incorporate a section or two in future videos since wrist rests really complete a build, in my opinion. Once all the pieces are ready, I added heat set inserts to several layers to hold everything together before super gluing the pieces that form the top together. This is sort of my answer to acrylic boards that still rely on standoffs, and I do really feel that this solution makes for better looking final products. Hubris be damned, I expect full agreement in the comments upon the conclusion of this video. As we were all told in kindergarten, if you don't have anything nice to say, strive to be as loud as possible and perhaps consider a career in either popular media production or politics. Wait, is that right? Anyways, since I adhered rather strictly to the Cherry MX specification, I had a little bit of interference on some of the modifier keys, namely left alt, backspace, and the row 3 function key normally occupied by caps lock. Such issues really boil down to manufacturing tolerances, adjustments to laser cutting kerf, and small nuances in where your plate ends up, but a safer bet would have been to leave an offset of a few tenths of a millimeter within the switch top to avoid any identical concerns. Guess we're doing it live to salvage this piece. First, I tried to use some steel wool since its effective grit is much finer than any sandpaper I have on hand. When that proved inadequate and messy, I switched over to the trusty dull X-Acto blade that is ever so slowly becoming a star on this channel. While still a slow and potentially painful process, at least the acrylic comes off in relatively large shavings as opposed to a fine dust. Having to wear a respirator indoors in addition to out is kind of a downer. After a few rounds of back and forth with X-Acto Pal, we can finally piece together everything. I used M2 and M3 screws for the main keyboard and wrist rest respectively, and have a nitrile O-ring supporting the PCB assembly. This was the mounting strategy employed in the Unikorn kit from TGR and Singa I mentioned earlier, and I tend to prefer it over more typical sandwich and gasket strip options. Both are totally feasible if you are looking to try them out though. Since I'm not a robot, the screws I chose were just reaching the inserts, but not actually catching the thread in order to secure the pieces to one another. So a little coercion in the form of heat from my soldering iron was necessary to remove a 0.5 millimeter or so of space. At least this way I feel like this Hako was a solid investment in using it for things other than soldering, right? Lastly, since I had an adhesive sheet of Poron lying around, I also added 2 pieces along the win keyless blockers to further isolate the plate from the case. Probably overkill, but all the cool kids are doing gaskets, even though they've been played out since 2019. The wrist rest assembly was more or less the same, so I'll spare myself the few extra minutes of editing and you the displeasure of continuing to hear my voice. I probably spoiled it a bit with the edition. Oh, still going. Sorry. To finish the board off, I used 3M bump-ons. Who needs custom injection molded keyboard feet when there is already an overpriced mass market option available? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And here's some lovely B-roll featuring the stand that was seen earlier but not mentioned in my initial draft of the script. As far as keycap pairing, I had hoped my ever-growing collection of green theme sets would produce a likely candidate, but their colors tended to be muted relative to the vibrant green from the cast acrylic. Guess these will sit tight in their boxes along with literally every other GMK set I mindlessly purchase for aesthetics and aesthetics alone. Someone help me. Retreating from the hinterlands of German double-shot ABS to the superior and undoubtedly safer bastion of PBT, I reached for an APL set that I knew wouldn't clash with the green. I had a spare pink enter key from EPBT 9009 and threw that in there, since accented carriage returns are my thing. Not space, though. Death to accented space. Feel free to unsubscribe if you disagree. Good riddance. As an aside, it's 2021. Can we please start making alternative kits with cohesive sublegends and colors? I'd quite literally buy multiple sets of each if it helps hit MOQ, Hammer. Well, let's try the sucker out. Hello, and welcome to Hottie's Evening Chill Time of Typing. I'm your host, and I hope you're winding down for bed as you tune in to the sensual sounds of overpriced plastic pieces interfacing with delicate fingers, slowly contributing to the degradation of the joint dexterity that has largely defined our species for millennia. This, my friends, is what peak evolution looks like. Well, at least until carpal tunnel or RSI settles in. Not too shabby, methinks. If you're curious, here's how the same board sounds in the Unikorn. All right, enough of that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing to my channel and or contributing to my Patreon to fund additional projects like this one. Looking at analytics, only a few of you are subscribed, and the number, while arbitrary, really does mean a lot to me and is undoubtedly a metric used by YouTube to push recommendations. Furthermore, if you'd like to buy a similar kit or hardware featured on this channel in the near future, please consider signing up for my newsletter over at senselessclay.com. I'm not really sure what I'm doing just yet, but I feel like I need to compete for some reason, and I figured these would be better than t-shirts. Lastly, thanks again to PCBWay. Hoping to send some more projects your way soon. Is a 10 keyless on the horizon? Who knows? Now get off of YouTube and go make a keyboard, you weirdos. Kidding. This was the mounting strategy employed in the Unikorn kit from TGR/Singa I mentioned earlier, and I tend to prefer it. How the f do you say collabs? Is it plus? God damn it.